Okay, let's dive right into this explainer by confronting a pretty mind-blowing statistic. Whenever you order something online or, buy groceries that were shipped in from overseas, you're actually tapping into a massive global network. And get this, that network accounts for roughly 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions. 3%. To put that into perspective, that translates to a staggering 1.2 billion tons of carbon emissions this year alone. It's an astronomical number, really, and it represents one of the most stubborn environmental bottlenecks on the entire planet. So that brings us to the ultimate question facing logistics today. I mean, how do we take an industry that relies on thousands of these massive, heavy fuel-burning ships and transform it into a clean, net-zero operation? It's definitely not as simple as just plugging a cargo ship into a wall, right? The stakes here are incredibly high, which perfectly sets the stage for our deep dive into the high-stakes world of maritime environmental strategy. Today, we're going to use Yang Ming Marine Transport Corporation as our prime case study to really demystify how a shipping giant actually navigates this crazy transition. We'll look at the international regulations basically breathing down their necks, the actual hardware they're putting out on the water, and, of course, the very real financial hurdles they face while chasing these super ambitious ESG, or environmental, social, and governance goals. Here's our agenda for today's explainer. 1. The Maritime Carbon Challenge. 2. Yang Ming Sustainability Blueprint. 3. Green Fleet and Technology. 4. Marine Conservation and Society. And finally, 5. Future Costs of Net Zero. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the Maritime Carbon Challenge. To really grasp the scope of this challenge, we have to look at the intense external pressures forcing the whole maritime industry to evolve. And look, this pressure isn't just moral, it's highly regulatory. Organizations like the European Union are rolling out strict carbon taxes, and the International Maritime Organization, the IMO, is severely tightening its emission standards. Look at how Yang Ming analyzes these threats using what's called the TCFD framework. That stands for Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. They starkly weigh two very different types of risks here. Up on the top row, you've got transition risks. This includes things like the EU's emissions trading system and those new IMO standards. Basically, if Yang Ming doesn't comply, they face massive financial penalties and carbon taxes. But then, look down at the bottom row, physical risks. The company notes that the increasing intensity of typhoons can literally stall a ship outside a port for 4 to 5 days. Think about that. That means cargo delays, necessary rerouting, and burning significantly more fuel just to stay afloat, which in turn costs more money and emits even more carbon. It is a vicious cycle, and they absolutely have to break it. Moving on to Section 2, Yang Ming Sustainability Blueprint. So, to counteract these massive global risks, Yang Ming isn't just throwing out vague promises. They have a strict mathematical trajectory. Taking their 2021 emissions as a firm baseline, they've laid out clear stepping stones. By 2030, they're targeting a 10% reduction in Scope 1 emissions. Those are the direct emissions coming right out of their ship's smokestacks. They're also aiming for a 20% reduction in Scope 2, which covers the electricity used in their onshore offices and terminals. And all of this is engineered to culminate in one huge commitment, completely net zero operations by the year 2050. Next up, Section 3, Green Fleet and Technology.
Okay, so here's the million-dollar question. How do you actually reduce the emissions of what is essentially a floating steel city? How do these lofty boardroom goals actually get implemented on the physical cargo ships crossing our oceans? Well, a perfect example of this hardware transition is the newly delivered YM Willpower. This thing is a massive 15,500 TEU vessel, meaning it can carry over 15,000 standard shipping containers at once. It's part of their brand new LNG dual-fuel fleet. Just recently, it completed its first liquefied natural gas bunkering in Singapore, taking on nearly 3,500 tons of LNG fuel. And using LNG is a huge stepping stone because it burns significantly cleaner than traditional heavy fuel oil. It really represents a massive leap forward in their green fleet transition.
But, it's not just about building brand new ships. You can't just toss out an entire existing fleet. Yang Ming is heavily investing in upgrading their current vessels with some seriously advanced physical modifications just to squeeze out every last drop of efficiency. We're talking engine optimization for low-load cruising, they're redesigning rudders to reduce water resistance, they're even applying advanced low-resistance anti-fouling paint to the hulls. What that does is prevent marine life, like barnacles, from hitching a ride on the ship. That keeps the hull smooth, reduces drag, and honestly saves a surprising amount of fuel. Plus, they combine all this hardware tech with real-time weather routing to actively avoid those fuel-burning storms we talked about earlier.
in the results of these technical upgrades, they are highly tangible. One of their biggest, most impactful initiatives is alternative maritime power, which is also known as shore power. Instead of keeping the ship's massive diesel engines rumbling just to power the lights and refrigeration while docked, they literally plug the ship directly into the local electrical grid. Just by installing this capability across 58% of their fleet, they saved 3,200 tons of fuel in 2024 alone. Let that sink in. That translates to keeping roughly 4,800 tons of greenhouse gases right out of the atmosphere simply by changing how these ships idle at port.
Which brings us to Section 4, Marine Conservation and Society.
Because beyond just carbon emissions and complex fuel math, true sustainability requires a much more holistic view. We have to consider how these massive vessels interact with really delicate ocean ecosystems as they crisscross the globe. This ethos is perfectly captured by their recent Sapphire Award from NOAA, that's the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Yang Ming won this for their participation in the Protecting Blue Whales and Blue Skies program. What this actually means in practice is that Yang Ming deliberately reduces vessel speeds when they're traveling through sensitive ecological zones. And slowing down like that, it not only cuts air pollution, but crucially, it drastically reduces underwater noise pollution and helps prevent fatal collisions with endangered blue whales. It's just a brilliant example of how a relatively simple operational adjustment can have an immediate, deeply positive impact on biodiversity.
Finally, let's look at Section 5, Future Costs of Net Zero. Now, however much we celebrate these technological and ecological victories, and they are significant, we absolutely have to take an impartial look at the monumental financial hurdles standing in the way of a fully green maritime industry. Decarbonizing the ocean is not cheap, not even close. As the chairman of Yang Ming recently pointed out, the industry is basically stuck right now in a really difficult transition phase. The ultimate, perfect, zero-emission fuel, it just doesn't quite exist at a global scale yet. So shipping companies have to rely on transitional alternative fuels, things like advanced biofuels, LNG, and eventually green methanol. But here's the catch. These next-generation fuels currently cost anywhere from 1.5 to 4 times more than traditional heavy fuel oil. 4 times. And that doesn't even factor in the billions of dollars needed globally just to build the refueling infrastructure to support them.
So that brings us right to the core reality of this entire transition. And I want to leave you with this provocative thought. As the shipping industry takes these necessary, highly regulated, but incredibly expensive steps toward net zero, who actually pays for it? How will these multiplied fuel costs ultimately reshape the future of global trade? And maybe more directly for you and me, how will the price of a clean, sustainable ocean eventually reflect in the consumer prices of the goods we buy every single day? It's a massive, complex puzzle. But as we've seen with Yang Ming today, the blueprint to solve it is already being put into action out on the water. Thanks so much for joining us on this explainer, and keep your eyes on the horizon.